Tudor England refers to the period between 1485 and 1603, a span of just over a century marked by gradual change rather than sudden transformation for most ordinary people. While the names of monarchs often define the era, daily life for the majority of the population remained shaped by landscape, season, custom, and long-established rhythms. England at this time was overwhelmingly rural. Most people lived in small villages or scattered hamlets, surrounded by fields, woods, and waterways that provided both work and sustenance. Towns existed, but even the larger ones were modest by modern standards, and London, though growing, was still compact and closely tied to the countryside around it. The physical environment of Tudor England was familiar and intimate. Roads were mostly unpaved and followed routes established over centuries, winding around hills, rivers, and property boundaries. Travel was slow and often unnecessary, as many people spent their entire lives within a few miles of where they were born. The countryside was not an untouched wilderness, but a carefully managed landscape. Fields were divided into strips, hedges marked boundaries, and common land was shared for grazing animals or gathering firewood. Woods were valued resources, providing timber, fuel, and forage, and were often regulated by local custom. The population of England during the Tudor period is estimated to have grown from around 2.5 million to perhaps 4 million by the end of the 16th century. This growth was uneven and gradual, and its effects were felt differently in different regions. Some villages expanded while others declined. Population increase placed gentle pressure on land and resources, influencing patterns of work and settlement. Despite this, life remained largely local. Parish boundaries defined social and administrative life, and the parish church stood at the physical and symbolic center of most communities. Climate and weather played a steady role in shaping daily experience. The Tudor period fell within what is often called the Little Ice Age, a time of slightly cooler and less predictable weather. Winters could be long and damp, summers mild rather than hot. These conditions influenced crop yields, building styles, and clothing, but they were accepted as part of the natural order. People adapted through habit and experience rather than expectation of control. Seasonal change was not an abstract concept, but a daily reality, visible in the length of daylight, the condition of the roads, and the availability of food. Social structure in Tudor England was layered but stable. At the top were the nobility and gentry, who owned much of the land, but they formed only a small proportion of the population. Below them were yeomen, freeholders who worked their own land, followed by tenant farmers, craftsmen, laborers, and servants. Most ordinary people occupied the middle and lower layers of this structure, and while distinctions mattered, they were often expressed quietly through clothing, speech, and custom, rather than constant enforcement. People generally knew their place within the community, and daily interactions reflected familiarity rather than formal hierarchy. The parish was the main unit of local organization. It governed not only religious observance but also aspects of welfare, maintenance of roads, and care for the poor. Parish records, kept by local officials, recorded baptisms, marriages, and burials, anchoring individual lives within a shared record of time. For ordinary people, the parish provided continuity. Its boundaries rarely changed, and its routines repeated year after year. Bells marked the hours and important moments, their sound carrying across fields and lanes, linking households through shared timekeeping. Housing and settlement patterns reflected both geography and tradition. Villages were often clustered, with houses arranged along a main street or around a green. Farmsteads in more remote areas might stand alone, surrounded by the land they worked. Building materials were drawn from the local environment. Timber-framed houses with wattle and daub walls were common in many regions, while stone was used where it was readily available. Roofs were thatched with straw or reeds, materials that required regular maintenance but provided effective insulation. Life expectancy in Tudor England was lower than in modern times, largely due to childhood mortality, but many adults lived into their 50s or beyond. Age was visible and respected, particularly within the household and parish. Generations often lived close together, if not under the same roof, and knowledge was passed down through observation and repetition rather than formal instruction. Skills related to farming, household management, and local crafts were learned gradually, woven into daily life. Religion formed a constant backdrop to existence, shaping the calendar and providing a shared framework of meaning. The Tudor period saw changes in religious practice at the national level, but for ordinary people, daily religious life remained centered on familiar rituals and local churches. Attendance at services was routine, and religious festivals marked the passing of the year. These occasions brought communities together without spectacle, reinforcing continuity rather than disruption. Time itself was experienced differently. Without clocks in most homes, the day was structured by natural light, work demands, and church bells. Dawn and dusk mattered more than exact hours. The year was divided by seasons rather than dates, and memory often followed patterns of harvests, weather, and local events. This created a sense of steady repetition, where change was noticeable but rarely abrupt. In this setting, ordinary people lived lives defined by proximity, routine, and shared experience. The world was limited in scale but rich in detail. Fields, lanes, neighbors, and familiar tasks formed the texture of daily existence. Understanding Tudor England at this level means paying attention to these quiet structures that shaped how people moved through time and place, often without comment, within a world that felt stable, even as it slowly evolved. Daily rhythms in Tudor England were shaped less by clocks and more by light, habit, and necessity. For ordinary people, the day began with the gradual arrival of daylight rather than a fixed hour. In rural households especially, rising early was common, particularly during the longer days of spring and summer. Sleep tended to follow the natural cycle of the sun, with evenings quieting soon after dusk and mornings beginning at first light. This pattern adjusted gently through the year, expanding and contracting with the seasons. Morning routines were practical and familiar. Before any work began, households stirred into activity with small, repeated tasks. Fires were rekindled from embers banked overnight. Water was fetched from nearby wells or streams, and simple food was prepared. These early hours were often quiet, marked by soft movement rather than conversation. In many homes, especially smaller ones, several people shared the same space, and daily life unfolded in close proximity. Work began soon after. For those involved in agriculture, which included most of the population, tasks were closely tied to the time of year. Plowing, sowing, weeding, harvesting, and tending animals followed a well-understood sequence. Each task had its proper moment, learned through experience rather than written instruction. Missing the right time could affect yields, so attention to weather and daylight was constant but unhurried. The pace was steady, guided by the work itself rather than external pressure. Within households, work and domestic life were closely interwoven. There was little separation between labor and home, especially for women and children. Preparing food, cleaning utensils, spinning wool, mending clothing, and caring for younger family members were part of the same daily flow as fieldwork or craft labor. Tasks overlapped and repeated, creating a sense of continuity rather than division. Evenings did not mark a sharp end to work, but rather a gradual slowing. Meals were simple and taken at regular but flexible times. Breakfast was often light, sometimes no more than bread and small beer. The main meal of the day was usually eaten in the middle of the day, when work paused briefly. This was a practical arrangement, allowing people to eat while daylight was strongest. The evening meal, taken before darkness fully set in, was often modest. Eating together reinforced household routine, but meals were not elaborate occasions for most families. The pace of the day varied by occupation. Craftsmen working in towns or villages followed rhythms shaped by their trade. Shoemakers, weavers, blacksmiths, and other artisans worked by daylight, often in workshops attached to their homes. Their days were structured by the demands of materials and customers rather than fixed hours. Apprentices and servants followed the same rhythm, learning through observation and repetition. Workspaces were social as well as practical, with conversation flowing alongside labor. Children were part of these daily rhythms from an early age. Childhood in Tudor England was not sharply separated from adult life. Young children helped with small tasks as soon as they were able, gradually taking on more responsibility as they grew. Learning was informal, embedded in daily activity. Schooling existed but was limited and usually reserved for boys in towns. For most children, knowledge came from watching, listening, and doing. Rest was woven into the day rather than clearly marked. Short pauses occurred naturally, whether to eat, to adjust tools, or to wait for weather to change. These moments were not considered leisure, but necessary intervals within work. Sitting, stretching, or exchanging a few words provided relief without breaking the rhythm of the day. Physical fatigue was expected, but exhaustion was managed through habit and pacing rather than sudden stops. Evenings were quieter and more contained. As daylight faded, outdoor work ended, and activity moved indoors. Households gathered around the fire, which provided warmth and light. Tasks suitable for low light, such as mending or tool maintenance, continued. Conversation was often calm and familiar, centered on local matters rather than distant concerns. The absence of artificial lighting limited activity, encouraging rest without formal instruction. Sundays followed a different rhythm. Work was reduced, and attendance at church shaped the day. This pause in routine was widely observed and provided a regular change in pace. The walk to church, the service itself, and the return home created a gentle structure distinct from the working week. Afterward, time was spent within the household or community, maintaining the sense of shared rhythm without hurry. Seasonal change subtly reshaped daily routines. In summer, longer days allowed more work and extended activity, while winter shortened the working day and shifted focus indoors. These changes were anticipated and accepted. People adjusted their expectations and tasks accordingly, without seeing this variation as disruption. Clothing, food preparation, and household arrangements all shifted slightly with the seasons, reinforcing the sense of living in step with the year. Throughout these daily rhythms, repetition provided stability. Days were not identical, but they followed patterns that felt reliable. Familiar tasks returned each morning, each week, each season. This repetition reduced uncertainty and allowed people to move through their days with quiet confidence. Life was structured not by novelty, but by continuity, creating a steady background against which individual moments unfolded. For ordinary people in Tudor England, daily routines were not something to be planned or questioned. They were inherited, practiced, and passed on. The rhythm of rising, working, eating, resting, and sleeping formed a continuous cycle, repeated countless times across villages and households. Within this cycle, life proceeded at a measured pace, grounded in habit and shaped by the gentle movement of time. Homes in Tudor England were shaped by local materials, long tradition, and practical need. For ordinary people, the house was not only a place of rest, but also a workspace, storage area, and center of family life. Most dwellings were modest in size, built to shelter rather than impress, and closely connected to the surrounding environment. The appearance of a home varied by region, reflecting what the land could easily provide. In many parts of England, houses were timber-framed, with wooden beams forming the structure, and the spaces between filled with wattle and daub, a mixture of woven sticks, clay, straw, and dung. This method was well understood and relied on materials gathered nearby. In areas where stone was plentiful, such as parts of the north and west, stone houses were more common. Roofs were usually thatched, made from straw, reed, or heather, materials that were light, insulating, and renewable, though they required regular repair. Most ordinary homes were small, often consisting of one or two main rooms. The central feature of the house was the hearth. This open fire provided heat, light, and a place for cooking. Smoke escaped through a hole in the roof, or later through a simple chimney, filling the interior with a faint, persistent haze. This was a normal condition, accepted without comment, and people grew accustomed to it from childhood. The hearth shaped the arrangement of the room, with daily activity organized around it. Furniture was limited and functional. A typical household might own a table, a few stools or benches, storage chests, and beds made of wooden frames or simple platforms. Mattresses were often stuffed with straw, rushes, or wool, and bedding was shared, especially in colder months. Privacy was minimal by modern standards, but this closeness was familiar rather than uncomfortable. Belongings were few, and each item had a clear purpose. Floors were often made of compacted earth, sometimes covered with rushes that were changed periodically. These rushes helped absorb moisture and provided some insulation. Over time, they gathered dust and debris, but regular sweeping and replacement kept them serviceable. In wealthier homes, wooden floorboards might be used, but for most ordinary people, earth floors were common and practical. Light inside the home came primarily from the fire and from daylight entering through small windows. Glass was expensive, so windows were often covered with oiled cloth, horn, or left open when weather allowed. This limited the amount of light indoors, especially in winter, and shaped how space was used. Activities requiring good light were done near windows or during the brightest part of the day. Evenings were dim and quiet, encouraging rest and low-energy tasks. The interior of a Tudor home was rarely decorated. Walls might be whitewashed, both to brighten the space and to keep it clean. Occasionally, simple religious images or symbols were displayed, but ornamentation was modest. Clothing, tools, and household items were stored where space allowed, often hanging from walls or beams. Storage chests served multiple purposes, holding clothes, linens, or valuable items, while also functioning as seating. Cleanliness was maintained through routine rather than specialized facilities. Water had to be carried into the house, so its use was careful and efficient. Washing took place with bowls or tubs, often near the fire for warmth. Bathing was not a daily activity, but occurred regularly enough to be considered normal. The concept of cleanliness focused on visible dirt and comfort, rather than strict hygiene standards. Sleeping arrangements reflected both space and custom. Beds were often shared by family members or servants, particularly in colder weather. Curtains or simple partitions might be used to reduce drafts and provide a sense of enclosure. Sleep was segmented, with people sometimes waking briefly during the night before returning to rest. This pattern was natural in a world without artificial lighting and rigid schedules. Outbuildings were an important part of the home environment. Barns, sheds, and animal shelters stood nearby, forming a small cluster of functional spaces. These buildings stored tools, crops, and livestock, keeping essential resources close at hand. The boundary between home and work was therefore fluid, with daily movement between indoor and outdoor spaces forming part of normal life. Sanitation was simple and practical. Waste was disposed of in pits or midden heaps located away from the main living area. These were managed through custom and necessity, contributing to soil enrichment rather than being seen as purely undesirable. Such arrangements were part of the landscape and handled without fuss. Despite their simplicity, Tudor homes provided a sense of stability. They were places shaped by memory, routine, and repair. Houses were maintained over generations, altered gradually as needs changed. Beams darkened with age, floors became smoother through use, and small additions were made as families grew. These changes happened slowly, often without written record. leaving the home as a quiet reflection of the lives lived within it. For ordinary people, the home was not a private retreat but a shared environment. Its spaces were used continuously, adapted to different purposes throughout the day and year. Living conditions were modest but familiar, offering shelter, warmth, and continuity. Within these walls, daily life unfolded at a steady pace, shaped by habit and the gentle constraints of space and material. Work in Tudor England was closely tied to place, season, and skill. For ordinary people, labor was not a separate part of life, but its steady foundation. Most work was done close to home, often within the same parish, and followed patterns that had changed little over generations. Occupations were learned through practice rather than formal instruction, and knowledge passed quietly from one person to another through observation and repetition. Agriculture employed the majority of the population. Even those who identified as craftsmen or tradespeople often maintained small plots of land or kept animals to supplement their income. Farming work followed the agricultural year, with each season bringing its own tasks. Plowing and sowing prepared the ground, weeding and tending supported growth, and harvesting gathered the results of many months of effort. These activities required coordination within households and sometimes across the wider community, especially during busy periods. Fields were often worked in strips, with individuals or families responsible for particular sections within larger open fields. This system encouraged cooperation and awareness of shared responsibility. Livestock, including cattle, sheep, pigs, and poultry, were an important part of rural work. Animals provided meat, milk, wool, leather, and labor, and their care was woven into daily routine. Moving animals between pasture, shelter, and common land was a familiar and necessary task. In villages and towns, a wide range of trades supported everyday needs. Blacksmiths shaped and repaired tools, horseshoes, and household items. Carpenters worked with timber to build and maintain houses, carts, and furniture. Weavers, spinners, and fullers processed wool into cloth, one of England's most important products. Bakers, brewers, and butchers prepared food for sale, often working from their own homes or small workshops. Craft work was typically organized around the household. Workshops were attached to living spaces, allowing work to continue alongside domestic activity. Family members contributed as they were able, and apprentices lived and worked within the same household as their master. This arrangement created a close relationship between work and daily life, with skills learned gradually over years of shared experience. Guilds existed in many towns, setting standards and regulating certain trades, but for most ordinary workers, these structures were a distant presence rather than an everyday concern. What mattered more was reputation within the local community. Reliability, skill, and fair dealing were noticed and remembered. Work was often commissioned through personal connection rather than formal contracts, reinforcing the importance of trust. Laborers who did not own land or a trade worked for wages, usually on a daily or seasonal basis. They might assist with farm work, construction, or other tasks requiring extra hands. Payment was modest but steady, and work was often arranged informally. These workers moved between employers within their local area, adapting to the needs of the moment. Their routines were flexible, shaped by opportunity and demand rather than fixed schedules. Women's work was essential and continuous. In addition to managing household tasks, many women participated directly in agricultural labor, especially during planting and harvest. Others produced goods for sale, such as dairy products, cloth, or small items made at home. Brewing ale in particular was a common activity for women, providing both household supply and supplemental income. This work was recognized as part of the local economy, though it was often described simply as household responsibility. Children contributed to work as part of their upbringing. From a young age, they helped with simple tasks, gradually taking on more responsibility. This participation was not considered burdensome, but part of learning how life functioned. By adolescence, many children were fully involved in productive labor, whether within their family or as servants or apprentices elsewhere. Tools used in Tudor work were simple but durable. Wooden handles, iron blades, and hand-powered mechanisms dominated. Tools were repaired and reused rather than replaced, and familiarity with their use was developed over time. The physical effort required was significant, but tasks were paced according to daylight and weather, allowing work to proceed steadily rather than urgently. Markets played a role in connecting different types of work. Weekly markets and annual fairs allowed goods to be exchanged, sold, or purchased. For ordinary people, these events provided access to items they could not produce themselves, such as salt, metal goods, or specialized cloth. Market days added variation to routine, but they remained calm and purposeful rather than crowded or hurried. Despite differences in occupation, a shared understanding of work connected communities. Everyone recognized the necessity of labor and the value of skill. Work was not defined by ambition or advancement, but by contribution and maintenance. The goal was to sustain the household and meet obligations, not to accumulate excess. In this way, work in Tudor England formed a steady background to daily life. It was shaped by tradition, environment, and local need. Tasks were repeated year after year, allowing knowledge to deepen through familiarity. For ordinary people, work was neither idealized nor resented. It was simply the means by which life continued, woven quietly into the rhythm of each day. Food in Tudor England was closely connected to season, locality, and household routine. For ordinary people, meals were simple and repetitive, designed to provide nourishment rather than variety. What people ate depended largely on what could be grown, gathered, or preserved nearby. Imported foods existed but were limited and rarely part of daily life for most households. The diet reflected familiarity with local produce and long-established methods of preparation. Bread formed the foundation of most meals. Made primarily from wheat in wealthier regions and from barley, rye, or oats elsewhere, bread was eaten at almost every meal. Its quality varied depending on grain availability and household means. Darker, coarser loaves were common among ordinary people, dense and filling. Bread was valued for its ability to sustain energy throughout long hours of work, and stale bread was often softened in broths or used in cooking rather than discarded. Alongside bread, pottage was a central element of the Tudor diet. This thick, slow-cooked mixture of grains, vegetables, and sometimes meat or fish was prepared in a single pot and eaten over several days. Ingredients changed with the seasons, but the method remained constant. Pottage could be adjusted easily to what was available, making it a practical and adaptable food. It was eaten by all members of the household, often with bread used to scoop or soak up the liquid. Vegetables were grown in small household gardens or gathered from the surrounding land. Common vegetables included onions, leeks, cabbage, peas, beans, and root crops. Herbs were used both for flavor and for their perceived properties, and they were grown close to the home for easy access. Fruit, such as apples, pears, plums, and berries, was eaten when in season or preserved through drying or cooking. Meat was eaten less frequently than bread and vegetables, but it remained an important part of the diet when available. Pork was the most common meat, as pigs were easy to keep and could forage on scraps. Bacon and salted pork provided protein during colder months. Beef and mutton were eaten more occasionally, often tied to specific times of year. Fresh meat was usually consumed soon after slaughter, while preservation through salting or smoking extended its use. Fish played a regular role in the Tudor diet, especially in coastal regions and near rivers. Freshwater fish such as eels were common, as were salted or dried fish that could be transported inland. The consumption of fish followed customary patterns, and many households were familiar with methods of curing and storing it. This added variety to meals without requiring access to distant markets. Dairy products were widely used. Milk, butter and cheese were produced at home or obtained locally. Cheese in particular was valued for its ability to keep well and provide nourishment over time. Milk was often consumed in small quantities or used in cooking, as it did not keep long without cooling. These products added richness to an otherwise simple diet. Drinks were an important part of daily consumption. Small beer, a lightly fermented drink with low alcohol content, was consumed by adults and children alike. It was safer than untreated water and provided hydration and some nutritional value. Brewing was a common household activity, and the taste of beer varied from one home to another. Water was also consumed, especially in rural areas with clean sources, but beer remained a reliable staple. Food preparation took place over the hearth, using basic cookware such as pots, pans, and spits. Cooking was slow and required attention, but it was integrated into daily activity rather than set apart as a separate task. Meals were prepared once or twice a day and eaten when work allowed. There was little emphasis on strict meal times, and eating fitted naturally around other responsibilities. Household management included careful planning of food supplies. Preservation methods, such as drying, salting, pickling, and storing in cool places, extended the availability of food throughout the year. This required foresight and experience rather than calculation. Knowledge of how long food would last and how to use it efficiently was shared within families and communities. Utensils and tableware were simple. Wooden bowls, trenchers, and spoons were common, with metal items reserved for specific uses. Meals were eaten communally, often from shared dishes. This arrangement reflected both practicality and custom. Eating together reinforced routine and familiarity, and the absence of elaborate table settings kept meals calm and functional. Food carried social meaning without ceremony. Certain foods were associated with particular seasons or occasions, but daily meals remained modest. Hospitality was expressed through sharing what was available rather than offering abundance. The act of eating was a regular pause in the day, providing rest and sustenance without formality. For ordinary people in Tudor England, food was a steady presence rather than a source of novelty. Meals followed familiar patterns, shaped by environment and tradition. Through simple ingredients and repeated methods, households maintained nourishment and continuity. The preparation and sharing of food fitted quietly into daily life, supporting work and rest without drawing attention to itself. Social life in Tudor England was grounded in familiarity and proximity. For ordinary people, relationships were shaped by shared space, shared work, and repeated interaction over long periods of time. Most individuals lived among the same neighbors for much of their lives, and these enduring connections formed the basis of community. Social identity was closely tied to the household and the parish, rather than to any wider sense of society. The household was the primary social unit. It usually included not only parents and children, but also servants, apprentices, or extended family members. Living and working together created close bonds shaped by routine rather than deliberate intimacy. Roles within the household were generally understood and rarely questioned. Authority followed age, experience, and responsibility, but cooperation was essential. Daily life required shared effort, and this fostered a quiet sense of interdependence. Marriage was a central feature of adult life, though it was approached practically rather than romantically. Most people married in their mid to late 20s, after spending years working or saving within other households. Marriage marked the beginning of an independent household rather than a sudden emotional change. Husbands and wives shared labor and responsibility, each contributing to the survival and stability of the home. Expectations were shaped by custom, and daily cooperation mattered more than personal expression. Children grew up surrounded by adults and other children of varying ages. They learned social behavior through observation, gradually absorbing local customs and expectations. Play existed, but it was informal and often blended into work or daily movement through the village. Children were visible participants in community life, present at gatherings, markets, and church services. Their upbringing was shaped by example rather than instruction. The parish structured wider social interaction. Church attendance brought people together regularly, reinforcing shared identity and familiarity. Beyond religious observance, the parish was responsible for maintaining order and mutual support. Parish officials were drawn from the local population, and their duties were carried out alongside ordinary work. This created a sense of collective responsibility that was woven into everyday life. Neighbors relied on one another in quiet ways. Borrowing tools, sharing labor during busy periods, or assisting during illness were common practices. These acts were not formalized but understood as part of living within a community. Reputation mattered, as reliability and fairness influenced how others responded. Disputes occurred, but they were usually managed within the local framework, maintaining balance rather than seeking resolution through authority. Social gatherings were modest and tied to the calendar. Christenings, weddings, and seasonal celebrations brought people together without spectacle. These occasions provided variation within routine, marked by shared food, conversation, and familiar rituals. Attendance was expected rather than optional, reinforcing community bonds through repetition. The tone of these gatherings was steady and communal rather than exuberant. Friendship in Tudor England was shaped by circumstance more than choice. Proximity, shared work, and similar stages of life created companionship. People spoke with those they encountered daily, forming relationships that deepened over time. Conversation focused on local matters, household concerns, and practical arrangements. News traveled slowly and was often relayed through personal interaction rather than formal announcement. Social distinctions were present but understated in daily interaction. Differences in wealth or status influenced behavior, clothing, and speech, but they rarely disrupted the basic familiarity of village life. People addressed one another according to custom, using titles or terms of respect where appropriate. These distinctions were part of the social fabric, recognized without constant emphasis. Care within the community extended to the vulnerable. Older people who could no longer work often remained within their households or received assistance from neighbors. The parish provided limited support, but much care was informal and based on custom. This support was not sentimental but practical, reflecting an understanding that needs changed over time. Women played a central role in maintaining social connections. Through shared work, childcare, and household tasks, they formed networks that supported daily life. Conversation during these activities reinforced familiarity and trust. Men's social interactions were often shaped by work and shared labor, though these boundaries were flexible rather than fixed. Silence and privacy were also part of social life. Constant interaction did not mean constant conversation. People were accustomed to working alongside others without speaking, sharing space comfortably. This quiet coexistence reduced tension and allowed individuals to remain connected without demand. Over time, these patterns created a strong sense of belonging. Identity was shaped less by individual ambition and more by place and relationship. Knowing who one was meant knowing where one lived, who one worked with, and how one contributed. Social life did not seek novelty or expansion. It remained rooted in continuity. For ordinary people in Tudor England, family and community provided structure and reassurance. Relationships were maintained through routine, shared responsibility, and repeated interaction. Social life unfolded gently, without emphasis or display, forming a stable background to daily existence. Within this framework, people found familiarity, support, and a steady sense of place. Leisure in Tudor England was not sharply separated from work, but existed in quieter moments within the flow of daily life. For ordinary people, free time was limited and usually brief, shaped by daylight, season, and the demands of labor. Leisure did not mean inactivity. but a change of pace, allowing the body and mind to rest while remaining engaged in familiar surroundings. These moments were woven gently into everyday routine rather than set aside as special occasions. Much leisure took place within the household. Evenings, when work slowed and daylight faded, provided time for simple, calming activities. Sitting by the hearth, people might mend clothing, sharpen tools, or prepare materials for the next day. These tasks required less effort and could be done quietly, often accompanied by conversation or shared silence. The warmth of the fire and the steady rhythm of small movements created a sense of ease after a long day. Storytelling was a common pastime, particularly during the darker months of the year. Stories were drawn from local memory, familiar tales, or personal experience rather than written sources. They were repeated often, changing slightly with each telling. These stories did not aim to surprise but to reassure, reinforcing shared understanding and continuity. Listening was as important as speaking, and silence was an accepted part of the exchange. Music also formed part of everyday leisure. Simple songs were sung at home, at work, or during communal gatherings. Instruments such as fiddles, pipes, or drums were used when available, but singing alone was common. Music marked rhythm rather than performance, helping to pass time and accompany familiar tasks. Tunes were learned by ear and shared within families and communities, becoming part of the local soundscape. Games and quiet amusements provided variety, especially for children and young people. Simple games using stones, balls, or sticks required little preparation and could be played briefly between tasks. Adults sometimes joined, though play was not confined to specific times. These activities were informal and adaptable, fitting easily into the day without disrupting routine. Walking was both a necessity and a quiet pleasure. Movement between fields, homes, and neighboring villages was part of daily life, but it also offered moments of reflection. Familiar paths provided a sense of comfort, and walking alongside others allowed for gentle conversation. The landscape itself, known in detail, offered subtle variation through changes in weather, season, and light. Church and religious observance also shaped leisure in a quiet way. Beyond formal services, time spent in and around the church offered a change of environment. Sitting quietly, listening, or simply being present allowed for stillness within the week. Religious festivals, while structured, provided moments of rest from usual labor, marked by familiar customs rather than excess. Craft activities sometimes crossed the boundary between work and leisure. Spinning, knitting, or small-scale carving could be done at a relaxed pace, producing useful items without urgency. These tasks occupied the hands while allowing the mind to wander. The repetition involved was soothing, and the outcome, though modest, contributed to household needs. Social visits were usually brief and unplanned. Neighbors might stop by while passing or join for a short time in the evening. These visits required no special preparation. Hospitality was expressed simply through conversation and shared space rather than food or ceremony. Such interactions reinforced connection without placing demands on time or resources. Seasonal change influenced leisure habits. In summer, longer evenings allowed for more outdoor activity, while winter encouraged indoor pastimes. The shift was gradual and expected. People adjusted their habits naturally, finding comfort in activities suited to the conditions. This adaptability reduced frustration and supported a steady pace of life. Reading was limited for ordinary people, as books were scarce and literacy varied. However, when reading occurred, it was often done aloud, shared among listeners. This transformed reading into a communal activity rather than a solitary one. The content was familiar and repeated, reinforcing known ideas rather than introducing constant novelty. Quiet reflection was part of daily life, though it was not named as such. Moments of pause occurred naturally, whether while tending animals, sitting by the fire, or walking alone. These moments allowed thoughts to settle without deliberate effort. Silence was not uncomfortable but accepted as part of the environment. For ordinary people in Tudor England, leisure was modest and integrated. It did not interrupt daily rhythm, but softened it. Through small, repeated activities, people found rest and familiarity. These habits required little preparation and no distinction between work and rest. Leisure existed as a gentle extension of everyday life, providing balance without emphasis or display. Change in Tudor England occurred slowly and unevenly, often passing almost unnoticed within the course of everyday life. For ordinary people, continuity mattered more than transformation. While laws, rulers, and ideas shifted over the decades, daily routines remained largely shaped by land, labor, and local custom. Change was absorbed gradually, layered onto existing habits, rather than replacing them outright. This created a sense of living within a world that felt stable, even as it subtly adapted. One of the most noticeable areas of gradual change was population growth. Over the Tudor period, the number of people living in England increased, placing gentle pressure on land and resources. Villages expanded slightly, households became more crowded, and some people found it harder to secure land of their own. These changes were felt over generations rather than within a single lifetime. Families adjusted by sharing space, delaying marriage, or seeking work elsewhere within familiar regions. Agricultural practices evolved slowly. New crops and methods were introduced in some areas, but traditional farming remained dominant. Small improvements in tools or techniques were adopted cautiously, often tested over time before becoming widespread. The rhythm of the farming year remained constant, and knowledge continued to be passed down through experience. Even where enclosure altered patterns of land use, daily work still followed the seasons, preserving a sense of continuity. Housing changed at a measured pace. Chimneys became more common, improving indoor air and allowing for additional rooms. Windows with glass appeared gradually, increasing light within the home. These changes were incremental and depended on means and location. Older houses were adapted rather than replaced, incorporating new features alongside older structures. As a result, homes reflected layers of time rather than clear divisions between old and new. Clothing styles shifted subtly, influenced by availability of materials and changing tastes. For ordinary people, these changes were modest. Garments remained practical, durable, and suited to work. New fabrics or colors appeared slowly, often first among wealthier households before becoming more common. Clothing continued to signal occupation, age, and status, maintaining familiar visual distinctions within communities. Patterns of work also adapted gradually. Some trades expanded, particularly those connected to cloth production and local markets. Towns grew in importance, offering opportunities beyond agriculture. Even so, most people continued to work close to home, and new forms of labor were integrated into existing routines. Apprenticeships, household workshops, and seasonal labor persisted as the foundation of working life. Religious practice experienced change during the Tudor period, but for ordinary people, daily observance often retained familiar forms. Services, prayers, and the church calendar continued to structure the year. While outward forms shifted, the rhythm of attendance and the role of the parish remained consistent. People adapted quietly, focusing on practice rather than doctrine, allowing continuity to guide behavior. Markets and trade brought gradual exposure to new goods. Items such as spices, ceramics, or metal tools became more accessible over time, though they remained occasional additions rather than everyday necessities. These goods were incorporated into household life without altering its basic structure. The presence of new objects added variation without disrupting routine. Communication and movement increased slightly. Roads improved in some areas, and regular market days encouraged travel between nearby towns and villages. News traveled a little faster. though it remained rooted in personal exchange. Despite this, most people continued to experience the world within a limited geographical range. Familiar landmarks, paths, and faces defined their sense of place. Generational continuity played a significant role in shaping experience. Children grew up observing the same patterns their parents had known, learning skills and customs through repetition. Elders provided a living memory of how things had been done before, offering reassurance that change did not erase familiarity. This shared memory helped communities adapt without losing cohesion. Custom and habit acted as stabilizing forces. Even when external circumstances shifted, people relied on established ways of doing things. Festivals, work routines, and household practices were repeated year after year, anchoring life in the familiar. These repetitions allowed change to occur without causing disruption, smoothing transitions across time. Language and speech evolved subtly, but local dialects remained strong. The way people spoke reflected region and community, reinforcing belonging. Words and expressions changed slowly, shaped by use rather than instruction. Conversation remained focused on immediate concerns, maintaining continuity in how people related to one another. Time itself was experienced as a flow rather than a sequence of events. Without constant reference to dates or deadlines, people measured change through seasons, harvests, and life stages. Birth, marriage, and death marked the passage of years more clearly than political events. This perspective encouraged acceptance of gradual change as part of a larger, ongoing cycle. Through all of this, ordinary people maintained a steady approach to life. Adaptation occurred quietly, guided by practicality rather than expectation. Continuity was preserved through habit, shared experience, and close connection to place. Tudor England, as lived by ordinary people, was defined less by moments of change than by the slow accumulation of small adjustments, each absorbed into the rhythm of daily life and carried forward without emphasis.